and I hit the record button. So we're good. I've had several requests, Nikki, for people who couldn't be here at this time today, but who wanted to get a copy of the recording. So for everyone, welcome, welcome. My name is Cindy Verduce, and I am the director of the Career Center here at Indiana Tech. And we have with us today Nikki Fultz, who's going to talk with us about pronouns at work. The At Work series is something that a series of events we do in the Career Center that really looks at some of the issues that our students may face in the workplace. We'll have some additional events coming up. We're really excited about one we have coming up in March called Women at Work, which looks at some of the issues that women face in the workplace and some of the issues they have to tackle during their time, over their lifetime in their careers. So this is just one of several, but this is one that has really struck close to home. We've had a couple of students who actually came into the Career Center to talk to us because they had issues with their pronouns not being, their employers not using their pronouns at work. Sorry, people are trying to still come in. And so I really looked to find someone who could come and talk to us. And Nikki came super highly recommended. I will let her introduce herself and kind of give you the floor, Nikki. But thank you so much for being here. And thank you for talking about this important topic in the workplace.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Like she said, my name is Nikki Fultz. I am the executive director of Fort Wayne Pride. I have been a part of the organization since 2000. Fort Wayne Pride is really one of the only area LGBTQ specific organizations, one of the longest ones in our county, who directly works with the community. Originally, it was started as a Pride Festival only, and then it's evolved over the years to include a lot of other events, not just the festival. We have events throughout the year when there's not COVID. And then we also have a lot of resources on our website. We have ways for people to reach out to us. And then we do a lot of giving back stuff too. So we work with people in our community to make sure that their needs are met throughout the year. So that's a bit of my background. I've been with other organizations as well. But my big one is with Fort Wayne Pride. By day, I'm also a teacher. So that's my other part that I do.
I think you need to brag, Nikki, and tell everybody that you were Teacher of the Year for Fort Wayne Community Schools last year.
I was. Yeah, I was the Fort Wayne Community School Teacher of the Year. That is true. So before we begin in this, I want to make sure, and I always, whenever I do these kinds of presentations, I like to make sure people reflect on their own beliefs and feelings about the LGBTQ community. So sometimes we are, we have some stereotypes, we have some biases, we have some things that we carry with us amongst a different population. And so then we're maybe not as willing to receive information. So my hope is that you come in and understand, this is for students that you're dealing with or coworkers that you have, or, just people that you're coming into contact with. And so what can we do to make sure that we are respectful of other people and that we can build those relationships and understanding? I think that, education and visibility is, for me, one of the top ways that we can find common ground, no matter what, your background is or what your beliefs are. And so my hope is that we can do that today. You could think about your own positive and negative experiences about the LGBTQ community, wherever that happens to be at, and just to keep that open mind. I'm always willing to answer questions. If you're not comfortable asking them today, then feel free to ask me. You can send it on private chat, and I won't say who you are, or you can just ask on here. I also have, you can email me, director@fwpride.org. If you ever want maybe specific stuff down the road, maybe something comes up, you can go to our website and my information is there. So that's always out there too. It's not very easy to offend me. So any questions that you have, I would rather you ask me than to ask maybe somebody that would be a little bit more offended. And then also, I'm not trans, I'm not non-binary. I identify as a lesbian. And I am cisgender, which we'll get to, which means I was born female. I still identify female. So I don't know everything, but I have been around the community enough to be able to give information, and hopefully you can take some things away from it. I like to start off stuff like this with definitions and terminology, just so you're understanding that there is a difference between gender identity and sexuality and things like that, and that there's a lot of things in between. And so when I use the LGBTQ, that's used a lot: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and really there's a whole alphabet of things after it. That's just all the different sexualities and gender identities and things like that that can fall underneath that umbrella. And so whenever you see that LGBTQ, it really encompasses a really huge community that's got a lot of variety, a lot of diversity. It's not all just the same. And so everybody's experience is not going to be the same. Everybody is, their opinion on how things should be and what we should say are not going to be able to, get to everybody's beliefs, but I try to get an overarching idea. And one of the first things, one of the confusions that happens is a lot of times people confuse gender identity and sexual orientation, as in they feel like if somebody is transgender, then they would automatically be what would be actually straight, heterosexual, because they would date somebody of the opposite gender that they identify as. And that's not always true. Someone's gender identity does not go along with their sexual orientation. Sometimes it can be they were already married and then they come later in life and realize, or they've always known but had to hide the fact that they were trans. And so then they still stay with the same partner that they were with, which used to be an opposite sex partner, now is a same sex partner. There also can be, just people have differences of sexuality, just like cisgender people have differences of sexuality. And so when we talk about sexual orientation, we're not going to get into that too much since it's about pronouns today, but we are going to get into a little bit just so that there is that background, just so that you know terminology in the workplace, and maybe if people come to you and you have that at least a little bit of background. I think that puts people's guard down more if they feel like they can trust you, if they feel like you're knowledgeable in things. So when we look at that spectrum, we can go, Kinsey was did studies back in the 50s and looked at sexuality, and he did a scale and all this stuff. But today we can just look at it and say, there are people who are heterosexual, there are people that are homosexual, but there's not a lot of people who are exclusively either. There's a lot more people that are in between. Now, maybe they don't ever act on it. Might just be attractions that they have or feelings that they have. But we have a lot of stuff, that in between stuff, and people could still identify as gay or lesbian or heterosexual and maybe still have some leaning the other way a bit. But then there's also people who identify as bisexual and pansexual. Bisexual is just more of the older definition of, you're not seeing the gender, whereas pansexual people that is more of like the people nowadays, like the younger generation, are identifying that way quite often over being bisexual, because then it, in their mind, acknowledges non-binary folks, the people who don't really fit on the male or female spectrum. And so it's more of like, hey, I'm just falling in love with a person, not in love with a gender. And then there's also people who are asexual, and they're not attracted to either or any gender. They're just, maybe they are in romantic relationships, maybe not. But that's another sexuality to remember. So we are each born with biological sex, and we can get into this. There's a lot of scientific stuff behind it that, unless you've done a karyotype, you don't know exactly if you have maybe an extra X chromosome if you're a male, or if you have a Y chromosome if you're a female. You don't know your levels of testosterone. So there's a lot of things that we assume about people, but usually when we find biological sex, it's based on your genitals as you're born. Your external genitals are what they look at and decide if you're male or female, or if you're intersex. And so that is a difference of when we get into gender identity. Then usually when we talk about gender identity and transgender people, it's that biological sex that's held them up, legally or medically, emotionally through the years. Gender itself is something that really depends on person to person. You can't see me now, but I identify as female. I was born female, but I do wear masculine clothing. I have my hair long, but people can find their own comfort levels and find that, and that's what we're going to get into, the expression of gender. But also we can look at, what does society say that our gender does? What does as we evolve through and we go through things have roles for men and women have changed, but there's also some things that are really steadfast in there. And so our gender really plays a role in our lives more than we sometimes realize. So this is getting into the gender identity. So as we are looking at somebody's gender identity, this is something that sometimes right away that people know that they were born in the wrong body. They'll say that, they're 3-4 years old and they are saying, hey, maybe they were identified as male at birth, but they are, feeling and inside of them that they are a female. And so when that happens, there is some dysphoria that happens and people are trying to figure it out. But more often it happens as they get older. So, we sometimes people say, well, little kids can't know that, but, I've got a daughter who's 4 and she's, she will say she's a girl over and over again. She very much identifies as a female and nobody would question that. And so we have to give people credit, kids credit, that they have, they have a sense of who they are a lot sooner than maybe we always think. But somebody's deep internal individual experience of gender, if it doesn't correspond with what they were born, what they were assigned at birth, then they would be considered transgender. If you do go along with that, then you would be cisgender, and that's what the majority of our people are in the world. But there's people who then fall under a couple other categories, and it would either be transgender or they might identify as non-binary. Non-binary is not necessarily a new term, although if you talk to some people, they'll say, oh yeah, that's not something I've ever heard of before. But there's been two-spirited people in the Native American culture. There's been people who identify the third gender and some of the Asian cultures and things like that. So I think it's not a new thing, but maybe it's getting more publicity and more notoriety in our modern society. And so as we see that, then people are maybe thinking, oh, this is something I wasn't used to. But it's when people are identifying as non-binary, they don't want to go along, either binary construct. They're saying, hey, I don't necessarily fall into male or female category. I really feel like I'm me and I'm unique. And so those are people that would be identifying as they, them, which we'll get to here shortly. If somebody is transgender, they are different, the opposite gender than assigned at birth. And so if they're trans, we say trans woman, then usually, if you say trans woman, then they were assigned male at birth, but they identify as a female now. Trans male was assigned a female at birth and identifies as male now. So to remind yourself, and so that however they are identifying is what they would be. You don't want to say, oh, well, they used to be this. That is considered super offensive. When somebody is trans, if they've told you they're trans, that's not necessarily public knowledge unless they're out about it and they're telling people. Some people really don't want to have people know that about them. Some people do. So you need to make sure that you are aware of what their feelings are on the situation. But even if they are out about being trans, they don't want to talk about necessarily, who they were before, because that there's when they They're still that person, but they have they don't identify as that gender, and most likely they really haven't for most of their lives. So that might make them uncomfortable. So do be careful when you are talking about somebody and talking about their past and things like that, to make sure you're being respectful of that. So gender expression is something that then sometimes people get confused and think, well, if I know somebody's gender identity, then I know their gender expression, then I know their gender identity. And so that's where I was getting back to, like, it's completely acceptable in society for me to dress in men's clothes. People don't say anything about it to me. They don't, I don't get made fun of or anything like that. But if a male dresses in female clothes, oftentimes then they are ostracized or ridiculed or assumed to be transgender. Gender identity and gender expression are not necessarily the same thing. They can be. People will express themselves as a gender, but a gender expression is more about, like, how do you carry yourself in society? How do you, how do you dress? How do you look? How do you present your hair? What kinds of behaviors do you do that maybe people would assume normally would have been masculine or feminine? And so when we look at that, we have to realize, like, there's a lot of different ways we can express our gender, even if we are cisgender, or even if we're transgender or non-binary. There's all different ways to express our gender. And so we don't always have to think that, hey, this is, if I see somebody in a dress, then they're automatically going to be, yeah, she, her. You might want to ask that person, because they may not identify that way. So before we go too further, I want to make sure we're understanding some of the things that you wouldn't want to say, some terms you don't want to say. Now, queer is one that, depending on how much you know the person and how you say it, it can be okay. But it's a term that's been taken back by our community, especially young people, to say, like, maybe they don't want to fit into a certain box. Some people don't want to go by lesbian or gay, and so they identify as queer. And that's, they may be okay with you saying queer if you're friends with them or if you know them enough. But if you say the word queer in an offensive way, there's also that way to do it as well. And so keeping that in mind, homo, tranny, transvestite, dyke, fag, all of these, it, he, she, all of these things that we hear, people in our community hear, and we want to make sure that you're not using that terminology. If you're not sure if somebody's gender identity, you can ask them instead of saying he, she, or it, because obviously they're a person. Also, just as a side note, when we talk about sexuality, to not say sexual preference or lifestyle, because there's a few people in our community that will say, oh, it's okay, but overall people will say, it's not something that we're choosing, it's not a preference, this is just who I am, this is just a part of my identity. And so when you put it as a lifestyle or a preference, it seems like it's something that's that could come or go, and something that we maybe are choosing. So when we talk about gender norms and how we figure out gender, a lot of times we look to what we've learned from society. So what are the rules that we've learned for boys and men versus girls and women? What are the ways, what are people allowed to dress in? What are toys that people are allowed to play with? I have to get a drink, sorry. I'm apologizing. Sorry about that. What kinds of professions, do some, one gender over another, we assume, and how about family roles? What is expected of men versus what is expected of women? So as we go through, gender norms, we can realize a lot of stuff has been taught to us over the years. There's some stuff that is people are biologically, driven, or they enjoy something over another just because of who they are, or the experiences they have. But a lot of times it is, what's expected of us from society. And so when we break those rules, what happens? What happens when, we don't follow along the specified gender roles that we've been, put forth? And so a lot of times it leads to being made fun of and rejected, and, even abuse, and people can be killed. I mean, this is stuff that's happened over the years. And so that leads to things like people get really depressed, they have mental health issues, they become, dependent on substances. Sometimes they're kicked out of their houses, so they become homeless. They may have trouble with finding help or employment because of, they're not following the regular gender role that people thought that they were supposed to follow. So because of that, we have some statistics on LGBTQ youth, and specifically youth, I think, but that even goes into the college age, with people, that LGB youth are 3 times more likely to contemplate suicide, 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. 40% of transgender adults have made a suicide attempt at some point in their life, 92% of the time before they were 25. And all that comes from, if you're from a family that's more accepting, that rate drops significantly. So the more accepting, not just a family, but a community, a workplace, school, all of these things can help somebody feel better about themselves. And so, self-harm is higher, abuse of drugs and alcohol is higher, homelessness is higher, all because they're being rejected from places. So when people have a feeling of belonging, and they feel like they're respected, and they feel like people care about them, they're more likely to stick around. So getting into the pronouns part of it, when you look at somebody, you're not always going to know what pronouns they go by. So asking them, what are your pronouns, is just a way to be respectful of their gender identity, and to make sure that they know that you are trying your best. That's a big part of it. So if you automatically assume, that's going to get off on the wrong foot. Most of the time we can assume, usually somebody's gender identity, but one of the ways that you can do that is you can also, ask, tell them your pronouns and then ask theirs. So we're going to focus on, he, she, they. There are some Z and Zer and things like that, but those are not very common. I haven't, in Fort Wayne, or in this area, I really haven't heard very many people go by other pronouns very often. But if you encounter somebody who's using a different pronoun, then just work with them on using that pronoun correctly. And there are some people who don't like to use pronouns, they want to use just their name. And so they is the one that I think people usually get held up the most on. And so when we look at they, them, a lot of times people, especially English majors, say, hey, that's not grammatically correct. That's not the way I would talk. But we actually use that quite often. So if I'm not really sure of somebody's gender identity, I might say they, hey, I think they are coming over, or I think they're over there, that person, they're over there. Or it's just in reference to somebody else. So, hey, I think my friend's coming over later, they'll be here at this time. And they may not go by they, them pronouns, but we use that pretty easily in regular conversation. It's something we use, but when it's directed and we're told to do it, sometimes it gets harder for people. And so this is a word that's been recognized. It's not like a made up word. This is something that, we're seeing more and more of. And I think it's not going to go away at all. I wanted to go backwards here, but it's not going to go away anytime soon. So if I was talking about, instead of saying he or she studied, they studied, I called them, their pencil, that's theirs. These are all things that, we wouldn't have a problem with otherwise if we're just talking about somebody in general, that maybe we're not saying he or she, we're just saying, oh, they're coming over later. And so trying to just maybe work on that, and we'll get to some techniques to do. Some people are considered gender fluid, and so they may also identify as non-binary, but they also might use more than one pronoun. They might say, hey, I don't mind if you use they, them, or he, him, or I don't mind they, them, or she, her, or I don't mind any pronouns. I know there's people I know that say, however you perceive me, you can use those pronouns. I don't really care. And so, that's just an individual thing. And so that's when you have to talk to people and get to know them and ask, and they may change. They may have been using he, him pronouns, and then, now they're using they, them pronouns. And so, I myself have had several friends that, I've had to work with or work on, like remembering like, oh, this is what I need to make sure I'm saying, because I've always referred to them as one type of pronouns, and now they're going by another pronoun. So you don't have to be perfect the first time, but it's just working on remembering and trying your best. Respecting people's journey and their identity is a core of what this is. If you are trying, then I think people are more willing to, be forgiving. And that's what we get into this. If you make a mistake, apologize. Hey, I'm sorry, they. As long as you're genuinely sorry and you're actually trying, most people are going to understand. Obviously, there's some people who are going to be upset. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe this is something that keeps happening to them, and so they're just really frustrated. If it's something you keep doing, then I would say, hey, what I would start like thinking about that person, using those pronouns when you talk about them to other people. Make sure you're using those pronouns. That's something I know I've suggested to people I know where they're having trouble. I say, hey, like when we talk about them, you shouldn't be using their old pronouns. You need to use their new pronouns to make sure that, we're set. When you hear somebody refer to somebody as the wrong pronoun, or if you do it, it can make the person who's being referenced feel like disrespected. I'm not validating who you are. I don't really care about it. And even trigger some things, from their past. And so it is really, really important that you respect somebody's pronouns. And if you are ignoring them and misgendering them, you're attacking who they are. This is their identity. This is who they are in a core. Think about yourself and how much, if you identify as a female, being a female is part of who you are, or being a male is part of who you are. That's just, a core part, just like, who you're attracted to. That's a part of who you are. It's not the only part, but it is a big enough part that when you ignore it and disrespect it and just purposely misgender somebody, then it really can cause long-term damage, especially, to them, but also to your relationship with that person. So if they're a coworker, if they're a student, if they're just even somebody you're coming into contact with, you don't want to have that riff in your relationship. So how can we be an ally? How can we come forward and, make sure that people know that we're here and we're trying our best? One of the things you can do is to introduce yourself with pronouns. If you're a teacher in class, one of the things right away on the first day if you're introducing, you can introduce yourself with your pronouns. If you are, if you have it in your email signature, I have mine in my email signature just so that people know that I'm she, her. If people are misgendering somebody next to you, or somebody correct them. Those people are probably really tired of having to correct people all the time. So it's nice for you to step up and say, hey, and you don't have to make a big deal about it unless somebody's being rude on purpose. But, if somebody accidentally does it, you just say, hey, they, they. And even if you like repeat back a sentence, but then use their proper pronouns, just to remind that person, like, hey, I was using those pronouns wrong. And usually people will then say, oh yeah, in their mind, and fix it. If you're hearing transphobic or homophobic language, stop it, call it out what it is. Tell people, hey, I don't like that term. It's not okay. It shouldn't be used, and let them know that, because otherwise they're going to assume you're okay with it and they're going to keep doing it. And so I've come to the end, and I wanted to give some time for questions, comments, anything that you may want to get extra information on. Feel free to ask now.
Nikki, this is Cindy. One of the things we've done in our office, or we try to remember, is when people come into the office to say, hi, I'm Cindy, she, her, hers, just to kind of let the students know. We also have an ally sticker in our office, on the window in our office, so that students know when they come in that they do have allies that are in the office. So for my folks who are Indiana Tech folks, that's one way you can do that as well.
Definitely. Any way that you can show somebody there's a safe space, they're going to feel more comfortable. Also, that just tells other people, like, hey, my maybe intolerance of others won't be tolerated in here. And so, it gives it both ways of, this is a space where I can feel safe, but also a space where, if I'm homophobic or transphobic, maybe I'm going to avoid those comments.
Great point. So who's got questions? Feel free to put them in the chat too, as well. If you
for sure
don't want to come off. Really interesting. Thank you so much for talking about those things. Because of the students that we work with, I try to educate myself, and I took a class, and you're right. There's so many different sexualities out there, and the whole idea of gender versus sexuality. And I mean, it was really fascinating. I mean, it really opened up. I mean, I jokingly say I'm a old fat heterosexual woman, what do I know about topics like this? So, but it was good to be able to learn more, so that, I can help our students. And that's, mainly what this is about, though I did really want our employer partners as well to understand, because if this is not a subject that you've come across before, and all of a sudden somebody comes in to interview for a job, and, they say my pronouns are they, them, hopefully this will help them as well. Yes, thank you for sharing the PowerPoint slides. Very helpful.
And then somebody wondered where they could get the stickers at, if there was some available at Indiana Tech.
Stickers?
Or something. I think you had said something on your office so that people knew it was a safe space.
Oh, that I got that. Wow. Well, I've been at Tech almost 15 years, so probably not long after that. And someone had gotten them. If that's something people are interested in, I would be more than happy to order some more. One of the things too that we do is we have, next to our names, name plaques, we have our pronouns listed as well. So that's something that you might look at doing.
Definitely. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Do you have? Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some people you're just not going to change minds on. I think sometimes I've noticed that, it's more of like, this is your job. This is something you don't have to necessarily do it. You don't have to live it, but it's part of respecting another person as a human being. And so you may not understand it, but you still have to respect and honor somebody else's life. And so I think, that's what I try to tell people if they're like, oh, I don't want to say that, I don't want to do that. I do a lot of training with police officers. That's been a big push last couple years. And, I definitely encounter officers who feel that way. And it's like, your job is just to work with people. And so nobody's forcing you to agree with it. And just because you're going along with it doesn't mean that you necessarily understand it or agree with it, but it's just part of, professionalism and making sure that you are, presenting yourself in the world correctly. And so even for students, if there's students in class who are acting that way, they're in college to become professionals themselves. And so hopefully people can realize like you don't have to agree with it, but you do have to respect it.
Mhm. Yeah, the question was, do you have any advice for how we can respond to negative comments about pronoun identity from individuals who might be a little old fashioned and don't understand? And that is exactly what the comments that the students who came to talk to me, it was, people at work who were older, who were not really, to be honest, I don't think they'd have much exposure or been around people of different sexual orientations or gender identities. And so that's what hopefully this program today is helping to spread, that this is real. This is how we treat people with respect in the workplace, and hopefully educate people. So, and I think, I mean, I can't speak for other folks, but you wouldn't want to intentionally hurt anyone's feelings in the workplace. I mean, you don't intentionally want to be mean. So I think if we can help to educate others, especially allies, that's going to go a long way in helping more people to understand what this means when you use someone's pronouns. What does it mean to that individual? What does it mean to you? And just, this is a sign of respect. The world has gotten, so big and so global, and there's so many customs and things from other cultures even that we're all having to learn about and adapt, right? So this is just one of those things about accepting a person for who they are, and especially in the workplace.
Definitely, yeah. And to answer the other question about like, how do you navigate a career if you're, maybe unsure about coming out? That really has to become a personal decision. There's some workplaces that are very open and affirming. I know a high school teacher who's non-binary and living openly, and it's not a problem. But it really depends on, what job you're in, what location you're at, the population. And so it's just something you have to decide for yourself. Are you willing to maybe lose out on some opportunity to live, and live your truth? Or do you feel like maybe you have to be hidden a bit until you establish yourself in a career or understand the workplace more before you do that? And so it goes depending on, all these things, as well as your own personal comfort level. I think is the other part is, how willing are you to, maybe you are going to experience some adversity, and are you okay with that?
Yeah, and I would encourage you to check out the Indiana Tech Career Center YouTube channel. We did a program we've done it multiple times, but called Out at Work, where we had someone come and talk about the laws regarding sexual orientation in the workplace and how discrimination and things like that occur, and in what states and how all that works. But in addition, we did have someone talk about decisions that, you need to make to determine just what Nikki's talking about. So I encourage you to check out that recorded program as well, because that was a really good program. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much, Nikki. I really appreciate you taking the time to help us educate and understand better how to use pronouns in the workplace and what it means for all of us and those that our coworkers. So thanks again for being here, everyone. We will have more in the At Work series. Look for those to come. And if you have any questions about anything or want to get in touch with Nikki, feel free to reach out to us at careercenter@indianatech.edu. And if you have suggestions for other topics that we need to cover for At Work, please feel free to let us know. Thank you all for coming. And thank you again, Nikki. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you.